8 deaths in the US reportedly.
Several mysterious deaths linked to vaping.
Especially vaping as it pertains to innocent children.
What's a vaping? More than 20 dead, over 1,000 in hospital, and potential repercussions for the entire industry. And that's not even getting into the apparent teen vaping epidemic. Wasn't vaping introduced as the safer alternative to smoking? If that's the case, what's going on? Are vapes really safe? Is there something else to blame for these mystery illnesses? Or is the vaping industry just blowing smoke? Well, let's go on a ride and follow an ever-evolving tale of illness, addiction, and one of the biggest substance trades in the world as we look into what one wrong puff can do to you. But first, today's episode covers an ongoing and controversial topic. We'll be looking at the current string of vaping-related illnesses, the history of vaping, and the media coverage surrounding the industry. We're not doctors. We're not here to tell you what to do during your free time, and we're certainly not here to judge you on whether you smoke or not. If you have any health concerns, be sure to talk to your doctor about them. And with that out of the way, let's get into it. Setting things on fire and inhaling the smoke is kind of a time-honored tradition for humanity. So it shouldn't be a surprise that our topic today is just the latest entry in a long history of people smoking dried plants. Smoking tobacco in particular has been around long enough in one form or another that it may as well have been a universal constant. We can trace tobacco back as far as 6000 BC, and the tobacco trade has been a historically significant force since the 16th century. In fact, it is so historically significant that a lot of stuff has happened involving cigarettes. A lot of stuff. But for e-cigarettes, the technical term for products like Blue, Kenger, or Juul, their history is more tied to the modern day. Though the first known design for what we'd later come to know as an e-cigarette was introduced back in 1963. The 60s again. Groovy. Known as the smokeless, this device was invented by one Herbert A. Gilbert. Gilbert stated that the smokeless had potential to prevent disease from tobacco use, and even had dietary benefits. According to the Smithsonian Magazine, he claimed that anyone on a diet could smoke their favorite foods using vapor flavors like mint, rum, or cinnamon. Health benefits? Flavored vapor juices? Yeah, this is already sounding familiar. Of course, there was one big difference between Gilbert's smokeless and the e-cigarettes of today. The smokeless didn't have nicotine. In the end, the smokeless never managed to gain attention, and though different products were introduced since then with varying degrees of success, electronic cigarettes wouldn't take the main stage for another 40 years.
Knock, knock.
Who's there?
2003.
That's right, enter 2003, the year that brought us Finding Nemo, Arnold Schwarzenegger's election as governor of California, and the Matrix Revolutions. Convoluted storylines and disappointing conclusions aside, 2003 also saw the electronic cigarette make a resurgence after years of devices that failed to gain a foothold. Specifically, it was the year that a Chinese pharmacist by the name of Hon Lik demonstrated his first e-cigarette, now with 100% more nicotine. Lik had been inspired to make the device after he lost his father to smoking and following a night of bad dreams due to leaving a nicotine patch on. But e-cigarettes have faced some hurdles since their introduction. In Turkey, while e-cigarettes were classified as a tobacco product in 2008, the Ministry of Health never gave approval for the import or sale of the devices. Laws are even stricter in Thailand, where the sale, import, export, and possession of e-cigarettes carries heavy fines and even prison sentences of up to 10 years. Likewise, attempts to bring e-cigarettes into Singapore could result in fines, or as one TripAdvisor user discovered, having all vaping products thrown out. In September 2008, the World Health Organization released a statement clarifying their position on e-cigarettes. Namely, they didn't like them, or the fact that some vendors were apparently claiming that the WHO considered the devices to be safe. In the words of Dr. Ala Alwan, Assistant Director General of WHO's Non-Communicable Diseases and Mental Health Cluster, WHO has no scientific evidence to confirm the product's safety and efficacy. Its marketers should immediately remove from their websites and other informational materials any suggestion that WHO considers it to be a safe and effective smoking cessation aid. But out of the many e-cigarettes that emerged on the market, there was one clear winner. And if you're at all aware of the current trends or headlines, you already know who I'm talking about.
I Juul all the time.
They offer an assortment of flavors to choose from to vape, so we have a few of them to show you now.
Wow. And I'm an absolute loser for smoking it, and none of you guys should smoke this or smoke anything that matter.
Juul started up as Plume, a more cylindrical device than the USB stick-looking one that we know it as today. The Plume brand was sold in 2015 to Japanese Tobacco International, or JTI for short, which launched 2 new products in Japan this year. The founders then rebranded themselves as Pax Labs and launched the Juul in the same year. Since then, the worldwide vaping market has grown into an industry worth more than $10 billion. That's billion with a B, also known as kind of a big deal.
All's I'm saying.
Which is why any health concerns that have come up are just as big of a deal. September 2018, the FDA called e-cigarettes an epidemic among children and teens, sending warning letters to stores that were selling the product to minors illegally. December 2018, the Surgeon General issued a warning that e-cigarette use was unsafe. August 2019, the Minnesota Department of Health asked healthcare providers to be on the lookout for vaping and e-cigarette related lung diseases after noting cases at a local hospital. Later that month, the first suspected victim lost their life. Which brings us to right about now. So, what's changed? And what are the issues currently facing e-cigarettes? Well, there are a few issues. First, there's not really much oversight on e-cigarettes, at least not in the United States. According to Ned Sharpless, acting commissioner of the FDA, e-cigarettes are not safe, and that all e-cigarette products on the market are illegal as none of them have actually been assessed by the FDA. Regulators have pointed out how odd it was to wait until 2019 to take this stance. Specifically, Frank Pallone, a Democratic representative from New Jersey, stated that it was long past time for the FDA to act, and Diane DeJet, a Democratic representative from Colorado, said that, given the potential risks associated with these products, it would be reasonable to assume these products had been reviewed and approved by the FDA. But they haven't. And of course, it's not just independent startups like Juul that have entered the vaping ring. Plume is still run by JTI, and British American Tobacco unveiled their Vype e-cigarette in Canada, British American Tobacco being the second largest cigarette manufacturer in the world as of 2012, by the way. There are even questions regarding how effective e-cigarettes are for quitting smoking, especially with the increasing trend in underage vaping. The big concern is that instead of reducing smoking rates in adults, vaping may be creating more smokers overall. At the forefront of this particular concern, Juul. Specifically, Juul's flavors and advertising campaigns. Right now, teen vaping rates are soaring. According to an article by McLean's, the vaping rate amongst teens under 16 in British Columbia is 1 in 5. For ages between 16 and 18, it's 1 in 3. And those are just the teens who are telling the truth. Could you imagine being a teen answering that kind of question? Son, do you vape? Absolutely not. According to American Lung Association National President and CEO Harold Wimmer, a recently released report shows that 27.5% of youth are now using e-cigarettes, which is a problem because the most popular e-cigarettes contain nicotine. To get into a bit of science, yay science, when nicotine is absorbed into your blood after smoking, it gets carried to your brain. Once there, it's absorbed by the aptly named nicotine receptors on neurons in a part of the brain known as the reward pathway. These neurons then release dopamine, a fancy term for a feel-good chemical. It's also highly addictive, and creates addiction at a faster rate in young brains than in adult ones. And here's the thing. As you smoke, vape, or Juul more nicotine, the number of receptors in your brain increases. More receptors means a higher dosage is needed to fill them and get the same response, and since your body is now used to those receptors being full, when they're not, it's welcome to chemical addiction. Now, here's the thing. Selling or even marketing products like cigarettes, e-cigarettes, or products containing nicotine to youngsters is, at least in Canada and the United States, very, very illegal. As in, if you get caught not carting kids, lose your license illegal. But with flavors on the market like Juul's official lemonade and mango pods, or less legal third-party, usually berry-flavored Smurf's blood, some have questioned who the products are intended for. According to pediatrician Dr. Suzanne E. Tansky, the appeal of flavors for children is well understood by e-cigarette manufacturers, and the flavors also help mask the harsh taste of nicotine, making repeated use more likely, and thereby increasing the likelihood of developing addiction. Teen addiction concerns were further due to earlier advertising campaigns used by Juul and other e-cigarette manufacturers, ads that make vaping look cool and hip, and which bear a passing resemblance to some of the marketing used by Big Tobacco in the past. And on that topic, recently, Juul CEO Kevin Burns stepped down and was replaced by one Casey Crostwaite, whose previous position was Chief Growth Officer at Altria, one of the largest producers of cigarettes in the world. Though, devil's advocate for a second here, that particular move does make a degree of sense. In a turbulent time in the industry, it would make sense to have an experienced growth officer run your business. And speaking of turbulent times, the situation today is certainly turbulent. At least 20 dead, over 1,000 ill, and an ongoing investigation into both illicit and mainstream vaping products in terms of what kind of health effects they have. So, what is going on? Well, let's explore a few cases and get a look at the bigger picture. 52-year-old mother and lifelong smoker Mary Kerrie Davis took up vaping as a way to quit smoking. But given that we're talking about her now, you can probably guess that things didn't go so great for her. According to Mary Kerrie's husband, Kevin Davis, she thought it was safer. I certainly liked the fact that there wasn't the cigarette smell and her breath didn't smell like cigarettes. I kinda thought it was better too. Mary Kerrie only vaped nicotine-containing e-juice for several years, but eventually tried a THC-containing juice in California. After returning home to Georgia, where THC is illegal, she kept purchasing and vaping it. According to a report by CNN, Mary Kerrie's health entered a steady decline while vaping THC until she developed coughing, nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea. After a hospital visit on September 4th, her daughter Maggie recounts that she stated she was never smoking again. By September 6th, she had passed away. And while Mary Kerrie is not counted in the CDC's official list of victims, she was found with a white, cloud-like substance sticking to the inside of her lungs, the same hallmark trait that others suffering from the vaping illness. Then there's the case of a 17-year-old from Detroit that was admitted to Henry Ford Hospital. While his name has been withheld for privacy reasons, his family asked that the doctors share his story. When admitted, doctors found that the teen's chest cavity appeared almost empty on a CT scan, an almost total lack of air causing his lungs to disappear from scans. According to Dr. Hassan Nema, the damage was so bad that he, quote, would have faced certain death without a drastic operation, namely a double lung transplant. If you're unfamiliar with what double lung transplant means, imagine you have no lungs, and then imagine receiving someone else's lungs. That's it. That's how it works. Of course, there are serious complications. It's not quite as easy as take out old lungs and put new ones in. People who get lung transplants need to take medication to subdue their body's immune system so that it doesn't reject the new organs. It's not an operation that is taken lightly. But according to Dr. Nema, the teen's lungs were stiffened, scarred, and severely inflamed, to a point they'd never seen before. In Dr. Nema's own words, "What I saw in his lungs is like nothing I've seen before, and I've been doing lung transplants for 20 years. This is an evil I haven't faced before." Well, that's a terrifying quote, but we've still got one last case in store. Gregory Rodriguez, 22, was an avid vapor with a particular liking of THC-containing cartridges. He'd tried smoking bud previously, but his parents could smell it and disapproved. Vaping was much more discreet. Then on September 18th, 2019, he was admitted to the emergency room at Long Island Jewish Forest Hills Hospital with what he thought was a flu. He was feverish, nauseous, and short of breath. Throughout the day, his condition deteriorated. His blood oxygen level was dangerously low, and by the afternoon, he was on a ventilator. By the next day, he was in danger of organ failure, or heart stoppage. 4 days later, he woke up in the Long Island Jewish Medical Center's main campus, attached to machines that were pumping air into his blood and removing carbon dioxide. Gregory's lungs had shut down, and he had nearly lost his life. And he wasn't the only one at that hospital. According to Dr. Mangala Narasimhan, a lung specialist at the hospital, I think he was our 19th case. It's hitting us pretty hard, and that's just the ones who are severe enough for us to know about. and the scene in his lungs was grisly. Gregory's lungs were inflamed with extensive damage to the alveoli, a fancy word which here means air sacs. According to Dr. Narasimhan, the stuff coming out of his lungs looked like flan or custard. It was so thick. It was a lot of inflammatory cells. We had to do multiple rounds of washing his lungs out every day. After a few days, his lungs started to heal and started working again. Thankfully, Gregory's story has a happier ending than others. After spending 12 days in the hospital, he returned home, though he's still on the road to recovery. In Gregory's own words, "When I climb stairs, it feels like I'm climbing a mountain. When I run a couple steps, it feels like I ran a marathon." And the culprit? Well, there are a few things that could be causing issues. The big concern comes from lung diseases, so far linked primarily to third-party products containing cannabinoids and illicit brands like dank vapes. However, at this time, the CDC isn't certain exactly what chemicals are at fault, and have issued an advisory to cease vaping with any products. Early concerns focused on oils like vitamin E acetate, which could have been used to cut or thicken cannabinoid-containing juices. For reference, cutting a product is mixing other substances into a product to dilute it and increase quantity. It's like adding water to your roommate's soda to make it seem like you didn't drink any. The belief was that these oils were clinging to the inside of lungs, clogging them up and filling them with fluids, leaving them drowning in their own lungs, which is, in technical terms, bad. But recently, researchers from the Mayo Clinic examined lung tissue from the victims and found that the issue appeared to resemble chemical burns more than oil. What's the culprit behind these? Well, vitamin E acetate is one of the suspects, but there are also health concerns behind some of the flavorings. While most of the flavors are considered safe for consumption, that label is applied with the assumption that they'll be eaten, not inhaled. And speaking of taking a wrong puff, not having enough e-juice can be a problem too. Taking a puff on an e-cigarette without juice that's heated up enough or has run too low can cause something called a dry hit. Dry hits happen when the device's wick isn't heated enough, burning the wick and leaving the user with a lung full of unpleasant burnt wick air. This is said to leave you with a mouth full of heated cotton flavor and can irritate the throat. Not the absolute worst, but still not pleasant. Whether it's wicks or oils, when they're in a different state applied to a different region of the body, things can change. News update. On November 8th, 2019, the CDC announced that vitamin E acetate was one very strong culprit of concern. It was also found in all samples taken from those with lung illness, and found at the site of whereas other chemicals weren't as present. But we only get case-by-case results, and drowning in fluids and chemical burns don't quite align. So here's a little hypothesis from me, and keep in mind, I am not a medical expert. Okay, not a doctor over here, but is it possible that the oil clinging to the inner tissue of the lungs could carry chemicals with it that in turn burns them? We'll have to wait until the results come back, but just a thought. And to complicate matters further, CannaSafe, a testing lab in California that had analyzed 12 samples of black market vaping products, found that all of the products it had inspected contained pesticides, and some even had heavy metals like lead. But as of my script goblin writing this, the exact cause and extent still isn't known, and both the CDC and FDA investigations are ongoing. Though on November 27th, 2019, Massachusetts Governor Charlie Baker outlawed any flavored tobacco products except for products sold in specialty bars for on-site consumption. A 75% tax and nicotine limits were also placed on non-flavored e-cigarettes, though the nicotine limit only applies to vapes used outside of specialty bars. It's also important to note that e-cigarettes are a relatively new product. It took decades, or centuries really, to learn the devastating health effects of cigarettes, and those were marketed as healthy back in the day. Seriously, we really don't know what long-term effects e-cigarettes can have on people. So, where does all of this leave us? Well, in something of a complicated situation. The CDC has advised everyone to stop vaping while it investigates, and there's talk about a federal flavored vape juice ban. Though Juul has already pulled all of its flavors but 3 from the US: menthol, Virginia tobacco, and classic tobacco. Some states have gone so far as to ban e-cigarettes entirely and make the sale of vaping products illegal, a move that has been met with predictable ire from those who run businesses based on the industry, and has seen lawsuits against the states of New York and Massachusetts. Juul has also been accused of shipping out over 1 million contaminated products, and is facing not only public scrutiny, but also a lawsuit. In the same accusation, former Juul CEO Kevin Burns was quoted as saying, "Half of our customers are drunk and vaping like mofos. Who the is going to notice the quality of our pods?" And here's where I come clean on something. We had a miserable time on this topic. There were times where the script goblin came to me and said something along the lines of, "It's getting really hard to stay unbiased here. So, sorry buddy, no hard feelings. Thanks for doing your best while some people might be tempted to make loud, opinionated videos."
Oh, so you do watch my videos?
They have been known to show up in my autoplay sometimes, yes.
I'll take what I can get.
But to end things off, make sure you're aware of the risks with anything you put in your body. If you're ever unsure what's in anything you're taking, look for alternative products or dig a bit deeper and try to find something that actually lists its ingredients so that you can understand what you're consuming. Always know what kind of habits you're getting into. Trust me on this. Ooh, coffee.